I believe in God, and I believe God intervenes, and I believe God intervenes through people of faith. And I believe that what it's going to take, the radical truth telling, the reparations, the forgiveness, it's going to require actual faith to do. So this is really, we are at a moment where we really have to choose. We have to choose. Do we want white power, power that comes from whiteness, more than we want Jesus? That is the question. More than we want the power of the kingdom of God.
Hey friends, welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast on YouTube. I'm the host, Joanna LaFleur, and this is season 8 of the podcast. Thanks for joining, for catching these episodes. We're leaning into hope and positivity for the future because it's been a rough couple of years. So enjoy this episode of the podcast. And hey, if you want to check out 7 seasons of archives of the podcast, as well as tutorials, practical help for you in church communications, creative, websites, social media, we got it all here on the YouTube channel. So subscribe now and enjoy this episode. Lisa Sharon Harper, welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. If the pre-conversation before we record was of any indication, I think we're in for a great conversation. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, Joanna, and I look forward to being in conversation with you and your audience. Thank you.
Hey, I mean, we've already talked about our pandemic puppies, and we have a few friends in common. But and your words from your work, your writing, your voice as an audiobook, you're in my head already. But for those who don't know you, can you please give like a bit of context, like your work? Give us the bio on Lisa Sharon Harper.
Sure. Well, I've authored several books. I was actually started out as a playwright before I was any kind of a public theologian, though I am that as well now. I'd say that more than anything else, I'm a storyteller. And my call in life is to shrink the gap between our narratives. And so I do that in my writing. I do it also through consulting and training, designing pilgrimages and executing those pilgrimages across the world, actually helping people to dive in and soak in the stories of the oppressed from their perspective, so that that just changes us. There's no way we can be the same after having walked in the shoes of another. And my own life was changed so drastically by an experience of pilgrimage that's become kind of one of the flagship things that we do in the organization that I started several years ago called Freedom Road. You can find us at freedomroad.us. A consulting group. We have coaching cohorts and trainings in an institute. But mostly that group is a consulting group. And so we work with large national and international nonprofits, helping them to be able to change their stories so that they can be more ready for the work that is necessary in the 21st century.
Okay, so let's start there. Pilgrimage. Can you tell us about the pilgrimage? I mean, maybe you want to broadly, like, where would you take me on a pilgrimage? Or maybe you would never take me on a pilgrimage. Who are you taking? Where do you go? But it's also, I guess, when I hear pilgrimage, the thing I think of is Muslims who go to Mecca, or Christians or Jews who go to Israel. So what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, pilgrimage is I'll start with this. We like to say there's a difference between a trip, a tour, and a pilgrimage. On a trip, it's all about the great pictures you get. I stand in front of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and I hold it up, that kind of thing. Yeah. And, oh, look at me, I'm having a good time here. We're having a good time there. That's a trip, It also can be about fun memories, right? A tour is usually about what you learn at the different places that you go to. It's about consuming information and becoming smarter as a result of the places that you went. A pilgrimage, on the other hand, is about wholesale transformation.
Mm.
It actually happens more than any place else in the in between. It's between those different places that you've gone to. And it's everything. It's all parts of it. It's the conversations that you have with your conversation partner on the bus. It's the conversations you have over dinner and with your roommate as you're trying to fall asleep about the day and all that happened in the course of it. And it's the process of sitting and listening to those that the oppression happened to, or those who descend from those people, or
Mm.
experts that come from that community. Our pilgrimages at Freedom Road are always based in story. They're always tracing a beginning, a middle, and a right now, and leading us toward to consider taking action on behalf of the ones who live on the underside of that story. So the very first pilgrimage that Freedom Road ever did, as an organization, and it's a business. It's a fee for service business. It's not a non for profit. But the first one we ever did was the Ruby Woo pilgrimage. And what we do is we retrace the story of women's struggle for equality in America,
Mm.
from the suffrage movement to right now. And that one traces, it goes back to Seneca. It goes from Seneca Falls, New York, through New York City, down into Atlantic City, where we look at Fannie Lou Hamer and her amazing moment at the Democratic Convention in 1964. And then we go down into Washington, D.C., and we actually end with an advocacy day where we're speaking to people on Capitol Hill about what we've learned on this pilgrimage and what we're calling
Mm.
for policies, how we're calling policies to protect and secure the integrity of the image of God in women. Another pilgrimage that we do is called the Gospel and the Politics of Race. And so that pilgrimage begins in Montgomery, Alabama, at EJI, the Equal Justice Institute, and their Legacy Museum and National Monument for Peace and Justice, and then moves from there to Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was pulled from a field, from his uncle's house, actually pulled from his bed in his uncle's house, right across the street from the place where he was fabled to have whistled at the white woman, and
Wow.
put on the back of a pickup truck and eviscerated and lynched that night. And then within a 30-mile radius of that spot, you also have the place where Fannie Lou Hamer was raised and sharecropped and then organized for voting rights. And you also have the place where Stokely Carmichael raised his fist and said "Black Power" out loud for the first time in public, and defined what that meant, what that mantra meant, and the place where he was then made, public enemy number one
Mm.
because of that speech. Then we go to Memphis, Tennessee, where in Memphis we encounter the sanitation workers that were the people that Dr. King came to help when he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. Um, and then finally, we end in Ferguson, and Ferguson at the spot where Michael Brown lost his life. Some would say was lynched because he was a Black man, or at the very least, he was killed by extrajudicial judgment of a law officer. And we ask the question: how does this all connect, and how does it connect to our faith?
Right.
And what does it say? What does our faith have to say to it? And throughout the whole journey, we're asking the question of what is the good news here? What is the good news here? So pilgrimage changes us, and it really has changed those that have gone and been a part of it. This summer, we custom designed a pilgrimage, and we can do that as well. We did that for Trinity UCC, Trinity United Church of Christ, up in Chicago, the church of Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. And so we have 200 people coming on this pilgrimage all
Wow.
at one time. I know. Pray for us. Pray for us. It's going to be amazing.
That's a
It's
few
going to be
buses.
amazing. Yes, actually 4 buses that'll be kind of
Yeah,
traveling after each other from place to
amazing.
place. Sorry. And retracing the story of the entry, the subjugation, and the rise of people of African descent on U.S. soil, from slavery through
Wow.
Reconstruction,
Wow.
and all within the city and the surrounding area of Charleston, South Carolina. So, and then there are other pilgrimages that we have been talking with international partners about, one in South Africa, one in Australia. We were talking with the Tear Fund a few years ago about one in Australia, but price actually ended up becoming an issue. So we just put that one on hold. We'll see if that comes back around. If anybody wants to help fund it, please let us know. But that's the kind of thing that we are helping people to experience on our pilgrimages.
Right. And so your most recent book,
Hmm.
Fortune, is
Yes.
about, I mean, the whether literal or metaphorical, this pilgrimage you've been on of your own
Yeah.
family history. And as you've said right from
Yes.
the start, Lisa, you're a storyteller. And so you're
Hmm.
using your own story um to draw us into the bigger thing happening through the story.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us, why did you go about this work? Has this been like you've always been like a history nerd? Is this a recent passion? How is this?
Hmm.
What drew you into this? And I'd love to, of course, ultimately, I want to know what you've learned from it.
Well, I think that there's something about being one of someone who is of a people group that's been oppressed on particular land.
Mm,
Because in order to understand who you are and how you fit into society today, you can't understand that unless you understand your family's history. How has your family moved and been moved over this land? How did we get here from Africa? These are all the questions that I asked as a little girl. And in 1991, I called my mom on the phone and I sat her down, and it was after kind of having this moment where I realized I want to know more.
right.
And so I sat her down and I said, Mom, tell me, who are these people that you've been talking about? I want to see our family tree. So she literally helped me to trace the first family tree I ever traced on the back of a show bill, or really a show flyer, because I was working off Broadway and it was a flyer for the show that I was working on. And I don't even have the names. All I have is, like, grandpop lived at this time at this place. Great
Huh.
grandpop lived at this time at this. And it was very patriarchal, only for tracing the men, because that's how I was at the time. And I didn't realize this. Probably my family on both sides was pretty patriarchal. And so I didn't realize that. But anyway, that's what I had. Now, 30 years later, I think we have like 1,600 people mapped out on our family tree at
Wow.
this point. Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And I'm working with a genealogist that has actually almost doubled the amount of people that I have, just in the last year, because she's been able to make connections through DNA matching, and she's incredible, like literally incredible DNA matching and
Huh.
documentations. And so, but that it's been that process has been a liberative one for me. It's
Mhm.
been one that has helped me to understand in the core of my being who I am. And once you understand who you are, that's something nobody can take from you, no one. And for people of African descent in particular, and in many other people groups, especially Native American, who've been removed from their land and some even removed from their people, um, uh, there is a confusion of identity that then can come in and has come in and actually wreaked havoc on families and on family patterns and on communities. And I'm just a very firm believer now, after having done this work for myself, that I think that the result of colonization around the world has been disconnection.
Mm.
It has been not only the disconnection, of course, of the colonizer who leaves their land in order to go settle another land. So they are now disconnected from their own past and their own history. They forge this new identity called white, on that colonized land. And that identity, whiteness, is what then gives them the right to own and to rule on that land. It's a political construct that literally was created to do exactly that. So now their identity is white. It's not German, it's not Lithuanian, it's not English, it's not French or Spanish or Portuguese. It's white. And because of that, it then gets disconnected. But the disconnection doesn't end there. Disconnection also it permeates the lives and stories and generations of those who are oppressed,
Right.
who are taken from their land, told you are now black, because black means politically you were created in order to serve my wealth, my white wealth, to protect it, to entrench it, and to build it. That's why I exist as a black person, is to build white wealth. That's literally what we
Yeah.
were, what that category was created to mark people who were created to create white wealth. And so now I'm disconnected from my people's story, from who we really are. So the process of finding our family stories, remembering them, as I talk about it in the book, bringing the members of the body back together so that it can be one body of memory. Um, it's a healing process. It's a generative process. It's a transformational process. And ultimately, I think it's a redemptive process.
Yeah, well, just even in, as we speak, I'm speaking to you from Amsterdam. I've just, my family background is here. So I just have spent a number of days connecting with some of my own family history. And as I'm hearing you
Hmm.
speak, there's many, but one of the things that's standing out to me is this idea of like, because when a person moves by choice, the story
Hmm.
comes with them. So I have some
Yeah.
context of where I come from,
Mm.
because I wasn't forcibly moved somewhere. Uh, y- yeah, that
That,
I can quickly go back to some context of my
mm,
story where you've
yeah.
had to do so much work just for that. And even am
Hmm.
not even occurring to me really that even that, what is my ethnic heritage, the privilege I have of knowing what it is because
Yeah.
of the power of someone deciding they would come to my country from Europe. And
Mm.
in your case, you're
Hmm.
describing you've had to actually, like, even to the level of DNA, like what
That's right.
part, I assume you're meaning things like
Literally.
which country in Africa did
Yeah.
someone get stolen from?
Yeah. When I got my very first Ancestry.com DNA story back and it had the little pie chart, I
Yeah.
wept
Hmm.
because it was actually, and I think about this now, it was the very first time in my family's history for 500 years, for at least 440 years, which is the amount of time we've been on American soil, that we knew where we were from.
And where is it?
My God, all over the place. In fact, what my mom says is that our DNA is a map of the slave trade.
Wow.
That's really
Huh.
what it is. It's a map of the slave trade. So,
Okay.
but mainly on her line, and then I went. So I have to say also, I did African ancestry DNA,
Mm.
and that traces the matrilineal line. So mother's mother back 1,000 years. So what I know now, and it's also the most specific. What I know now is that my mother's mother, so my mother Sharon, her mother Willa, all written about in the book. Willa's mother Elizabeth, her mother Martha, her mother Leah, going back 1,000 years, are from the Hausa people
Hmm.
and the Yoruba people in
Hmm.
Nigeria.
Wow.
So I know that because I did that DNA test. And so they're northern and southern Nigeria,
Hmm.
and from very, very specific groups. So Yoruba is one of the largest groups, and that's where you have the griots, the storytellers. There's much more in Yoruban country and culture, but I really do believe we were among the storytellers in Yoruba culture, and that's been passed down from generation to generation.
And
And
your
then
work,
the
it's your life's
Hausa,
work.
it is my life's work,
Yeah.
and not only mine, but it's also my one of my sister's life's work, and
Mm.
my mom's. She's also a storyteller, so it's just really does run in the family. um, and then the Hausa people are all about fashion. They just love they're all about the textiles. It's just beautiful, beautiful,
Huh.
beautiful textiles. And they're horse people as well. And so now that makes sense of why when I got on that horse a few years ago, first time in my life, it just felt oddly familiar. It's like, how'd that happen? I've never been on a horse before and I'm pretty good at this. Whoa. So they were horse people. And anyway, so there's that. But then there's a lot more. So it's not only Nigeria, it's also Mali, comes up in my DNA story, and Senegal. And depending on which one you're looking at, if you're looking at ancestry.com, it's Mali. If you're looking at 23andMe, it's Senegal that comes up. But it's actually what I now know or believe is that it's actually that place where they all meet: Guinea, Mali, Senegal, because Sambo Game, who is my 11 times great grandfather, he came from Senegal.
Hmm.
And his name, Sambo, means second son, and it's a Wolof name, and it's located in the southeastern, really the eastern edge of Senegal, and in particular that southern corner where Guinea and Senegal and Mali all meet.
Wow.
And so I believe that that's where that is coming from in my DNA. But when I wept because every single one of those nations, those people groups, is a story,
Yeah.
and it's somebody who was forced into a jail, basically, the jail for people who had been captured or sold into slavery, that was usually underneath the church in the slave port in Ghana or Senegal or the Gambia, where Sambo was boarded, and then branded, and then forced aboard a ship where they had to survive.
Right.
And so many didn't survive. In fact, many more didn't survive than actually did. And they made it. And then they survived some more on this land for 340 years. And so here I am because we survived. But I would say that one of the things that has surprised me the most as I now, stand back from the work that I wrote is another story that's told throughout it that I didn't even realize I was telling. It was kind of brought to my attention by one of the readers, Dr. Ruby Sales. She said, "Lisa, the thing that's so unique about your story is that it's not only the story of subjugation. Your family found ways to fly in and through the oppression. You
Hmm.
found ways to fly over it and through it and in it, and to always be about the work of helping the race, helping the people." And I didn't really realize that, but it
Hmm.
really is true. And it's a driving drumbeat throughout every generation.
Wow.
So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have that now. Now that the writing work is complete.
Well, you talk about this idea of now as you've done this work. I think the line is exactly where and how the world broke. So,
Yeah.
um,
How did the world break?
I think in the Christian story, we think, well, the world broke when they ate the fruit off the tree. But
Right. Yeah.
what does this mean to you?
Yeah.
Where and how did the world break? Because of course, if we know where it happened, we can then
Hmm.
work
You
forward.
can undo it. You can
We can
unbreak it.
undo,
Right.
we
Like
can redeem, we can
you
repair.
can bend to repair like
Yeah.
what was broken. That's exactly right. And that's exactly the question of the book.
Mm,
Well, you can obviously trace it back to Genesis 3. That's when the world broke. But in a very concrete sense, right? So, in a concrete sense, when you're looking at the history and the moment that race itself, the construct of race broke the world, you have to trace it back to the moment that Plato began to pontificate on this thing that he called race. And he
mm,
he said that different people groups are made of different metals. There's the gold people, the silver people, the copper people, and different metals determine how different people groups will serve society. He literally called it race. And of course, we know that's bad science. It's not really. There's no such thing as race. We know that now.
Well,
But then,
and
and there's
certainly
it's
not made of
debatable,
metal, the
right? Yeah,
metal
no,
is not
certainly.
causing our skin color. Yeah.
Hello, somebody. Yeah, exactly. And so it only took 10 years for it to go from that pontification, which actually then establishes race as the
Hmm.
thing that is created to order society. Like, that's what we know. He may not have had hierarchy in mind, but he definitely, it was created to order society. To say these people will serve society in this way, and these people will serve society in that way. The gold people serve society in this way, and so on. Well, 10 years later, his acolyte, Aristotle, pontificated in his book on politics. And he talked about the barbarians as a race. And he talked about how they were created to be subjugated. And he talked about, if a people group, he actually said this, if a people group has been subjugated, it has proven that it was created to be enslaved. Right.
Oh,
So there we begin to have the slave class and the ruling class, right? That is, and it's not just a class as in like economic, it's like literally created by God to
yeah.
be this thing. And then you just flash forward about 1,000 years and you get Pope Nicholas V. And Pope Nicholas V is really the true turning point in our history, because what he does is he has a family friend that comes to him and says, "Hey, Pope, I want to go exploring and I need a blessing." And he says, "Hey, I'll give you a blessing. And in fact, I'll do you one better. If you come across land where the people are not civilized or Christian, then you have the right to claim the land for the throne and enslave its people."
Right.
So in that moment, in 1453, 54, 55, depending on who you're reading and what moment you're talking about in particular, in that moment, Pope Nicholas V established the foundations, the legal foundations, became legal foundations for what gives us the entire world as we know it today, the colonized world. The age of conquest begins then and there. And
So it's
with that,
sorry, just to pause just for a second. It's
mhm,
interesting that you're bringing this point up because right now,
mhm.
like today, I read in the paper there's a group of it might not just be Canadians, but because I'm a Canadian, I'm reading the Canadian news. A group of indigenous Canadian people are right now meeting with the Pope in Rome about this very issue.
Yes.
And there's some
Wonderful.
optimism that he might acknowledge, say the I'm sorries, whatever it is. However, the Pope says those things, we were wrong,
Let
we
me just
should never have
say,
said this. This
let me just say,
exact thing that you bring up.
until oh yeah, exactly. I mean, because what it is it's the Romanus Pontifex is the name of the edict that Pope Nicholas V stated. And then that became the doctrine of discovery, and that became the legal foundations for the age of conquest.
Mm,
And it's why we have Canada. It's why we have the United States of America. It's the legal foundations upon which the entire Caribbean was colonized, all of colonized Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand. The world as we know it exists because of that edict, and others that followed. So Terra Nullius is another one, right? That came down also by a pope. So when you look at when I look at this question of whether the Pope is going to acknowledge the lie
right.
of that edict and acknowledge the bad theology, in my mind, until he does, the Pope is a liar.
Mm,
Until he acknowledges the truth, he's a liar.
mm,
And until he actually repents of the sin of that lie, then he is party to and complicit with the destruction that came from it.
mm.
He is a part of the problem until he acknowledges it and begins the process of repairing. And you can't begin that process until you tell the truth about it. He
Right.
has to.
Yeah.
He has to. It's time.
It's It's only been what, 500 years. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
2022. Here we sit.
Well, it's actually since that edict, it's been almost 1,000 years.
Is
I
that
mean,
is
that
was
edict
it
was
oh, okay.
fourteen.
I was reading about something today that was from the 50 about 500 years ago. So maybe I'm referring to, you're the
Oh, you know
expert
what?
more than
No,
I
you're right.
am.
You're right. You're right. You're right. Because it was 1452. Forgive me.
Okay.
Yeah, 1452,
Um,
453 rather. Hmm.
you know, and that's where I think when you talk about the word repair, we're also talking about
Hmm.
reparation, like money.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, what it's like I'm maybe at a loss for
Hmm.
words because speaking, I think for a lot of people thinking like, how do you make a fix? You can't fix this, even just,
Well,
I mean, what, sorry, I
who
mean,
does
in
it
the,
benefit? Who does it benefit to believe that?
how much money could fix this? I don't think there is enough money to fix this.
Oh, there is.
So
There
yeah, so
absolutely
teach me
is.
about this. Talk to us about this.
Yeah. In fact, in 1967, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a book called "Where Do We Go From Here?" It was in the shadow of the Watts riots that happened because of the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and then the subsequent walking back of that legislation by the next Congress. And so the Watts riots broke out, and Black folk were frustrated. And he said, "Where do we go from here?"
Yeah.
And what he wrote in the very first chapter, he said, he says, I was in a conversation with this high up muckety muck, in the Federal Reserve or in some big economic institution in the US. And I was asking, what would reparations take? And this guy he actually said, we have what it would take. It
Huh.
really wouldn't take that much. In fact, it would be doable and we wouldn't even hurt that much from it.
Really?
The only thing that would need to be the case is that rich people would be willing to get rich a little slower.
Oh.
That's all
Oh.
that would be needed. How
Okay.
about that? And he said the only thing that's really needed is the will. And when you look at the case for reparations in America, the reality is that people of African descent are the only people group in America that have never had reparations given for the oppression that we experienced on this land on a federal level, on a national level.
Mm.
Every other people group who have experienced national oppression has received national reparations, not African Americans. Why? Why is that?
Right. Well, maybe
Why
that's,
is that?
again, my own, I'm not an economist, so I don't know how the money works. And maybe that's, um,
Here's the thing. Let me
I
let
mean,
me let me
that's the
just say,
driving, as you're saying, actually the money is there. It's a will
it's
issue.
there.
So yeah.
We could find trillions of dollars to pour into we made money in order to deal with COVID.
Right.
We could do this.
Mm.
And we're fine. The economy didn't tank. There was no oh, now it's all going down because we
Mm.
pumped up. No, no, no. Businesses stayed afloat. We're able to do this. And there are ways to pay for it that would not actually require everybody, having to pack up and go home. That's not the goal. And, the question of whether or not, how do you undo it? You can't undo it.
Yeah.
You can't undo it. And in fact, there are some things that just can't be repaired.
Yeah.
Like there are people who have died who are not going to come back.
Right.
There are communities that have been busted up either by Indian, Native American removals, eminent domain, or just flat out massacres of whole communities and race riots in the 1919s teens and 1920s. I mean, in that you can't get those things back, those people and those communities and that love back. And for those things that cannot be repaired, my book Fortune, in the very last chapter, calls for forgiveness. But remember, it's the last chapter that comes right after the chapter on reparations. And so reparation is first and foremost, it is about the repair of the relationship.
Mm.
the relationship between the group that oppressed and the group that was oppressed, the relationship between the government and the people it has been oppressing. It is the repair of those relationships.
Mm.
And one thing that we know is that in order to repair a relationship, you have to know when it broke. So I would say that the relationship broke the moment that that first explorer came with that edict in his hand to the coast of Africa, of West Africa, and looked at the people and said, I hereby declare that according to our law, which you are somehow now a party to, I have the right to colonize this land and enslave your people.
Right.
Like that's the moment that the relationship broke.
In the
Why?
name
Because
of
those
some Christian
people,
good, in fact.
ironically, those people, according to the first page of the Bible, had the image of God in them. They were called and created with the call of God and the capacity to exercise dominion on land, according to the Bible. But they did not, they ignored that. And when the Pope gave that edict, he was not referencing the Bible. He was not referencing the first page of the Bible. He was referencing Aristotle,
Right.
who said that if you are shown to be created to be a slave, if you can be conquered,
Right.
right? So
Well,
yeah.
this is where when we talk about your book, your previous book about good news, the very good
Mm-hmm.
gospel, and what I
Mm-hmm.
often say here at Word Made Digital is that the church, we don't just have good news, we have the best news in the world, but
Yeah.
often we make it sound like the worst news in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I'm trying to come around to get your take on is just it seems to be this hindsight thing that we do where we've taken the good news, or the loving intention of God in the world, and we distort it, and it's in hindsight typically that we
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, we made the mistake there. Or not just a mistake is not the right word in this case, but we did
I
wrong
understand.
there.
Mm-hmm.
I think
We got
even
this
we
wrong.
got this wrong. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
on all kinds of issues. And it
Yeah.
makes me very sober in my thinking around social issues today that
Mm-hmm.
are divisive.
Mm-hmm.
Because we got it wrong before, and it has been
Mm-hmm.
so damaging. Just like, why would anybody want this? It just sounds like, it doesn't sound like very good news. It just all sounds like bad,
Mm.
this church thing, that
Mm.
we
I understand.
this in Jesus name thing that we do.
Well,
Uh
I think it's because of the whiteification of the church
yeah, okay. Let's talk about
and the
it.
whiteification of our faith. Yeah, let's talk about that. I think, and what do I mean by that? What I mean is that Jesus was brown skinned and Jesus was politically black within the Roman Empire. By politically black, I mean he was seen to be in a class of a people that was at the bottom rung of the hierarchy of human belonging within the Roman Empire as a subject of Rome, as a colonized subject of Rome. Um, and so, as a politically black man who was physically brown, operating within a people group that would have assented to the philosophy of Aristotle, that believed if you've been conquered, then you have shown yourself to be created to be a slave. So within that context, everybody who looks at him, whether it's Caesar or Herod, they are seeing somebody they believe was created to be enslaved, right? um, they in that context, our brown Jesus stands in the synagogue in Luke 4 and says, I have come to free the oppressed.
Right.
I have come to set the prisoner free. And guess who the prisoners were? When Jesus was born, the year that Jesus was born, 500 per day, 500 people were crucified per day by a general that came through town in order to squash a rebellion against Caesar. A lot of those prisoners were political prisoners. I've come to free the prisoners and to set the oppressed free. Who is he talking about there? In white churches, you often hear people say, I know I did. He's talking about the spiritually oppressed.
Hmm.
That just makes me laugh now because they're not talking about the spiritually oppressed. He's talking about the oppressed, as in they didn't need to go outside of actual oppression to find oppression. They were oppressed people, like as in crucified.
Right. This
Every
isn't a
family
metaphor.
in
This isn't
northern Galilee would have
metaphorical.
known someone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's not metaphorical. Yeah.
No, it's not
It's
metaphorical at
literal.
all. Yes, it is literal. In this case, I'm a literalist. I actually believe what the text is saying. And so, when I say that the word, our faith itself, has been whitified, it's not just whitified, it's been colonized. It was in the hands of brown colonized people. It was written by brown colonized people. Not one person who wrote this scripture was European. Not one.
Yeah.
Not even Paul. Paul lived in Rome, but Paul was not European. He was a brown colonized man living in Rome.
He's a
To have
Jew.
me to say that I am European or white because I lived in New York City, that would be the equivalent of that. No, this is. I mean, it was an empire, meaning it had all the people living in its capital city, and that's what Rome was to that empire. And in the same way, you have that here. So Paul, not one. And yet, when we get to Constantine then takes the text, takes the faith, and places it in the hall of empire, and then interprets it from the halls of empire. And from that point forward, empire then becomes the arbiter of what this brown colonized text means. So, of course, we're going to get to the slave trade, and the text is not going to say anything about it. It's going to be mute. It's going to have nothing to say. Calvin, Switzerland, did not own slaves, but did finance the transatlantic slave trade. And Calvin, Switzerland, did not have anything in its understanding of the gospel that made it stop doing that, that outlawed it.
Hmm.
Right? Luther's Protestantism all over the map in Europe. And that Protestantism did not stop the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. There's something wrong with that when the faith itself comes from brown, colonized, enslaved people.
Right. Right. I hear
So
you.
you see what I'm saying? There's
Yeah.
something wrong with that.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened. And that's how our faith has become so deeply distorted. So when young people say to me, how can you still call yourself Christian or even
Mm.
evangelical, or, how can you, or, Christianity is the white man's room? I was like, no, 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 no. Jesus was literally brown, Afro-Asiatic man,
Yeah.
literally come from a people group that were they didn't have Asia and Africa back then. They didn't call themselves that. This is the land he lived on. He was brown, and he was subjugated by white European empire that racialized his people and said, you are therefore, because you have been subjugated, now you have shown yourself to be created to be enslaved.
Right. So, even just in the last few weeks, I've been to Tanzania and to Kenya, and it was fascinating to see how many white Jesuses they had in their
Yes.
depictions. It was white Jesus
Wow.
everywhere. I was
Oh
surprised.
yeah.
It was my first time to the continent, and
Mm-hmm.
so I
Mm.
assumed surely he wouldn't be white here, but no, he was all again, it's all
Oh,
part of this colonization.
it's
And
exactly right. It's internalized
yeah,
colonization,
and in
which is
turn,
actually
yeah.
in many ways more dangerous
Mm,
than even the original
mm,
colonization, because when it's enforced by the people themselves, it's that much harder
right,
than to throw it off.
right. Um, so there's a few different ways we could go at this moment in the conversation, but I mean, one of the big questions
Mm.
I think, as we're talking about these big ideas, and they can feel overwhelming. So then you just sort of shut off, you just don't do anything.
Hmm.
So what's at stake here at this moment?
Mm. Ooh, what a great question. What's at stake right now in the United States is our very democracy. In that same book by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in the same chapter, actually, he says that the segregationist, now today we would read white Christian nationalist, right? He says the segregationist would rather have a native or American, rather, form of fascism
Mm,
than democracy if democracy requires equality.
mm,
And that is exactly what we are seeing and have seen for like the last 5, 6 years in America. That those forces that he would have called segregationists back then, that now we understand it's now in the form of Christian white nationalism, or white Christian nationalism rather, that there's a hatred, actually, a disdain for democracy, because democracy means something very different when the land is all white,
mm,
right? Or vast majority white, which is what it was back in 1950. But now we have a fast diversifying America. And when your core identity is not who you actually are, but rather this racial construct that has been given to you, this thing called white that says that you were created in order to rule. You were created to be the ones who rule on this land. And now, though, you are now coming into a time in 23 years in in America's future, one generation, we're going to have a majority people of color, the United States of America. And very soon after that, the majority of people who are leading in America are going to be people of color. And so you see that coming. And if your core identity is not Christian, but rather white, then what you're going to do is you're going to fight like hell to keep your power, because your entire identity is wrapped up in your power, wrapped up in your call to rule. You see?
mm,
So, what does it look like then? What does it require of us in order to move forward? First, we have to acknowledge that what is at stake is our democracy. Um, Literally, that group, white Christian nationalists, are fighting democracy right now. 19 states have passed voter suppression laws. Almost every state, 48 states, tried to pass voter suppression laws over the last 1 year.
right.
19 states actually did it. That's more than half of the states in America. Or it's no, it's not. It's almost half of the states in the United States of America. And so when you look at, and then gerrymandering, I mean, all of these, especially purple states, the ones that are contested states, they are gerrymandering their maps, their voting districts, into oblivion. You can't even recognize the state anymore, the communities, because of how they are carving up communities in order to cut the influence, to dilute the influence of people of color within their state, so that white people will still be in the majority no matter where they live. That is evil. Because what is it doing? It is through the law, through the structures, doing exactly what Jim Crow did. It is silencing, muting, tying, binding the hands of people made in the image of God, making them incapable of exercising God given call and capacity to exercise stewardship of the land
Right. Well, it's as you
through
said
the
about
only
the
thing, the
Pope.
most basic way
It's a
we have in
lie.
a democracy,
The
which is the
democracy is,
vote.
yeah, the democracy itself is a lie if
Yeah.
it's, messed around with to this degree that the people
Yes.
have lost their voice. It's a
That's
lie.
right. It's not
As
democracy
the
any longer. In
as the
fact,
as the Pope lies, so does democracy.
so does democracy. And in fact, it's literally becoming. It has the ability to very quickly, as in literally by the end of this year, the November vote that we have coming up in the United States of America is going to be the place where we make the decision. We're going to make our decision about our future this November,
Mm,
because this November we're going to be voting on the Senate and we're going to be voting on the House, and that's the place where legislation is made. That's the place. And if we give our Senate over to the GOP right now, I have nothing against the GOP inherently, but right now the GOP has become the party of authoritarian rule.
mm,
They are the ones working explicitly and openly so against democracy. So, and remember, this is not just out of the blue. It's not even because of a political ideology. It is in order to maintain racial and gender power, the power of white men.
So, I mean, what do you want the people, me,
Hmm.
Joanna, and
Hmm.
those listening? Not all are American. This is sort of
Hmm.
a bit more of
That's
a
right.
global audience. So,
Hmm.
in some ways, I guess you can address Americans and then also global audience.
Hmm.
The way some political scientists in Canada are writing, you know, they're talking about democracy in the US crumbling by 2025. And these are, I'm not an expert. These are other people who are experts.
Mm.
And that's a take on the topic. And that will affect the global community.
Oh, well, yeah.
That's not an American problem. That's a global thing. And so that's why
Hmm.
I say all that to say, Lisa, as you speak, although it's a global audience, what happens as goes the United States, so goes not the whole world, but so goes a lot of
Much
things
of
in
the
the world.
world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. I think that look, I would be right there with those predictions if I did not believe in God.
Hmm.
Um, but you see, I believe in God. And actually, it is my family's story that you find in Fortune that gives me the capacity to believe in God. I believe that there is a God who intervenes. And I believe that because I see how God intervened in the story of Leah. I see how she was born an enslaved person, but did not die one. She, in her 20s, actually was set free because of the Emancipation Proclamation, and then the outcome of the Civil War, and then the 13th Amendment, which set all people of African descent free on American soil. And that was God.
Hmm.
That was God intervening. I believe in God who intervened in order to bring about the women's suffrage movement, making it possible for women to vote in America when nobody thought that was possible. Women actually did have the right to vote in America until the Revolutionary War, and then lost the right to vote, ironically,
Hmm.
once America became America. The U.S. became the U.S. And it wasn't until 1920 then that we regained that right. But why? Because women of faith rose up and said, no,
Hmm.
no more to crushing and subjugating the image of God within me. I too am made in the image of God. I too am called to exercise stewardship of this world. And in a democracy, the most basic way to do that is through the vote. So give us the vote. I am I am here, and I can bear witness to the power of God in the world to intervene because of the power of the civil rights movement. Again, powered by people of faith. My mom, a part of it. My dad, um, kind of a part of it. Like, he was a photographer at that time, and also a young person, a teenager, really in his 20s, investigating this civil rights thing. But this was something that changed not only the U.S. but the world.
Hmm.
It gave us a category for what it looks like to begin to gain freedom within the democracy, not just having to overturn it, but actually transform it so that we could all receive the benefits of it. I would be right there with those predictions if it was not for the witness of my family and what my family witnessed in the world,
Hmm.
witnessed of God in the world. I believe in God, and I believe God intervenes, and I believe God intervenes through people of faith. And I believe that what it's going to take, the radical truth telling, the reparations, the forgiveness, it's going to require actual faith to do. So this is really, we are at a moment where we really have to choose. We have to choose, do we want white power, power that comes from whiteness, more than we want Jesus? That really is, that is the question. More than we want, the power of the kingdom of God.
I think I want to leave it there. I don't think I want to ask you another question. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the question we should end with.
Mm-hmm.
What do we want? It's like it
That's the
sounds
question.
I'm imagining like uh Pontius Pilate with Jesus. Do you want Jesus or
Mm,
Barabbas? What do you want? What do you
right.
want?
What is it that you want?
What
Because
do you
this
want?
is the year we get to choose. This year,
Hmm.
we choose.
Hmm. Uh, if people want to find your book, they want to find
Mm-hmm.
your work, they want to go on pilgrimage,
Mm-hmm.
where do you want to send people today on the internet?
Wonderful. Well, if you would like to go deeper, then come and join the conversation over at lisasharonharper.com. And you can find all of my work there. You can basically connect with everything we're doing right there, lisasharonharper.com. You can find out directly about the book there, or you can just go to fortunebook.us, fortunebook.us. Or you can find out about how to do a pilgrimage or get consulting, get some training at freedomroad.us. So freedomroad.us. And I'm on all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Meta. I always laugh when I say it because come on, somebody, please. Facebook,
Yeah.
I'm on all the socials and you can find me pretty easily. Lisa S. Harper on Twitter and Instagram, and Lisa Sharon Harper page. You should go to the page version, not just my profile.
Yep.
On Meta on Facebook. So
Lisa,
yeah.
thank
Mhm.
you. A prophetic voice, as you said, a public theologian, but I also think public theologians have often a little bit of a drier approach. So you're a
Ah,
you are a prophetic
storyteller.
voice, a storyteller,
Mhm.
um, and you invite people higher. So thank you, Lisa, for
Mm.
your work,
Mhm.
and I do hope that people go and track you down. So of course, all this is going to be in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Joanna. God bless you.